It's
Good to go.
fully PFAS.
So we are back on the air. Good morning. It's Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. We're resuming work in the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We were interrupted by a drill, and now we're getting back to it. We'll pick back up on Bill S-82 and activating the development of a committee to study the impacts of PFAS and leachate from landfills in the state. So, Mr. O'Grady, I think you were at the helm when we paused.
I'm going to share my screen and put the S-82 up on the screen. Actually, S-82 is not on any website. So. So as Senator Lyons referenced, the bill in section 1 creates a PFAS study committee to study the impacts of PFAS from landfill leachate on Vermont's natural resources, identify new methods for disposal in landfill leachate, and expand the options for solid waste management in the state. Page 2 is the membership. The Commissioner of DEC or designee, member of Casella, appointed by the Speaker, a member with expertise in landfill management, appointed by the Committee on Committees, a member from an environmental organization, appointed by the Speaker, a member from the Department of Health, and so those would be the members. Then they have powers and duties. They shall develop a long-term state plan for management of PFAS and solid waste, develop recommendations and strategies to monitor PFAS and landfill leachate, develop recommendations to monitor PFAS and composted material, and whether it is available for application, and recommend alternative treatments for PFAS contaminated leachate other than discharge to surface waters. And then last, evaluate whether a segment of the population is bearing a disproportionate share of the commercial or the environmental burdens of PFAS and solid waste, and recommend how to identify, reduce, and eliminate those disparities. The committee has the assistance of A&R. They report back to you on December 1st, 2023. That should be 24. And then the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation calls the first meeting. He elects a chair from its members. Majority of the members constitutes a quorum. And ceases to exist February 1, 2024. And then for attendance at meetings during adjournment, the members are entitled to per diem. That is the bill.
Okay. Yes, so this intersects with ongoing work in this committee, especially for new senators, committees new to this committee. We've been having PFAS discussions for many years, probably 5 or 6, maybe more than that. And so you were reminding us, we looked at we established in law allowable levels for 5 PFAS compounds in drinking water. We've done statewide testing and was monitoring for that. We didn't have levels for groundwater, and so that's the work that's ongoing right now in EMR. Is that right?
Generally, yes. So the remedies, especially for water and contamination, are moving away from identification of specific chemicals and looking at the total fluorinated compound. And that apparently leads to more broader results, identifies chemicals that you wouldn't identify if you were just looking for specific compounds. So the fluorinated compound is the issue. It's the thing. It's the part of the chemical that doesn't break down.
So I know that one of our challenges slash frustrations has been with you. That I think we set levels for 5 fast compounds, but they're depending on who I hear the number from, the total number of PFAS compounds in commerce is between 5 and 7,000, right? And then we discussed in this committee trying to be able to regulate by class or subclass so that we would sweep up more chemicals rather than chip away at a list that would take an infinite amount of time to get through. The other limitation we ran into was that the EPA testing methodology was expanding, but the last count I knew was something like 37 chemicals were now, different types were a lot, they had a testing protocol for. If you didn't have an EPA testing protocol, there was no legally and scientifically valid way to assess. So I don't know if you can update us on that, if the numbers going up, if we're seeing any success of regulating by class or subclass.
I'll be frank, I haven't been looking at EPA on this issue. I've been looking at California, and California's, they're the one leading on the testing of the total fluorinated compound in, for example, in compostable materials and water. There is a question of the viability of testing, but they've provided a timeline that allows for it, and also they have an alternative if the testing isn't viable. And the issue with the California standard, from my perspective, is that so when you test for the chemical, you're testing at you're looking for parts per million specific. But when you look for fluorinated compounds, you might be looking for parts per billion. Or actually it's the other way around, sorry. And so the advocates are criticizing the total fluorinated compound standard because they think it's less strict when it's actually going to identify more of the chemical. And so that's what the work I have this in a NIHS article on the viability of fluorinated compound testing and why it is a better surrogate than testing for individual chemicals.
So I'm not sure if I heard it or sort of heard it backwards, but our current standards, like the Vermont standard of like 20 parts, it's parts per trillion that we're regulating.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
And that's for all 5
Right.
in aggregate, right?
Yeah.
And then, so parts per million is 1,000 times more per megaton.
But it's for the fluorinated compound, not the, right? So you're looking for that at that level, you're looking for things that would have been undetectable. So if you're just looking for the individual chemical.
And I think Secretary Moore, when she was last visiting, when we had a brief chat about it, said the EPA was moving to a standard of parts per billion.
Right.
So 1,000 times, or might even have been more strict than that.
Yeah, I think that status is changing. I think that's part of the discussion, whether or not it should be EPA standard or parts per trillion standard or a total fluorinated compound standard. That's, I wouldn't say it's purely a policy decision. I think you probably want to look into the substance of it, especially if you want to have a regional effort or source reduction so that there's comparable testing and monitoring across all. I would recommend bringing that captain in.
Yep.
And he's the head of the solid waste division, which has a large part of the responsibility for this issue.
Okay, thank you. I know that it's been a frustrating issue to work on. That's I understand, we have to have a legally valid and approved testing protocol, otherwise we can't regulate. And we don't have many approved protocols for testing. The 5 or the 37 out of the 5,000 or 7,000. Like catch up. Sarah Watson.
Thank you. We've finished walking, right?
Yep.
So I have some language questions. So page 2, line 13. So develop a long-term state plan for management of PFAS in solid waste. I am wondering if because it has to manage it in solid waste to me means things going into the landfill as opposed to management in effluent or leachate, what is coming out of the landfill. Was there any thought about why, like the distinction between those two things, or does solid waste capture both ends, or?
So the definition of solid waste in A&R solid waste rule is pretty broad.
Okay.
And it would likely incorporate landfill leachate, but if you want to be specific, this is a subject to be specific on, I would say.
Okay. So it might include it, but we could be more specific. Okay. And another, so similarly, just wondering about a definition here. Same page, line 17, monitoring PFAS in composted material and whether it is available for applications. In composted material, to me, means something that is, I guess that's a solid disposal process, as opposed to like the solid byproduct of a wastewater treatment plant, for example. I don't think of that material as composted. Is that, again, is compost material here a broad term that might incorporate the solids that are coming out of a wastewater treatment facility, or coming out of
It may incorporate what comes out of a wastewater treatment if it's managed to Class A standards. So
Okay.
exceptional quality biosolids can be sold as compost.
Okay.
But it's probably also, again, this is where you may want to be specific about the source for composted material, because, for example, PFAS has been found in commercial compost produced in the state, and its source was likely the feedstock, the leaves or the, and so you may want to be specific about what you want to look at.
Yeah, I mean, because my understanding is that material that goes through a regular composting process, like food scraps to, just a big turned pile, let's say, that process is not going to do anything to the PFAS. It's all going to be there. It's just.
It's right. I mean, the challenge there is the source. There's a bill in the House that would set standards for sources of compostable material, or calling a material compostable.
Yeah.
Because some of it already has specifically has PFAS in it.
Right.
But it's just compostable.
So I think we'll come back to, there's last year we did a bill on compost and the working group to make recommendations on how to handle food residuals that end up feeding into the compost stream.
So.
Along with, there's a depackaging facility that grinds up materials, that concerns there were microplastics plus PFAS getting into the food residual slurry that then eventually go to the biotester and then chase that all the way through, doesn't end up getting land applied. At the farm.
And so if I may,
Sorry.
it is fine. So is the intent of um, 3 there, is it to make recommendations around whether something is suitable for application?
I think it's both. It's not just whether it's suitable for application, but what is going into the material.
Okay, thanks, that's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you. It's sort of a tiger by the tail issue. Once we get started on PFAS. Really, thank you. To address in a satisfactory way. But I think we'll need to, because there's been a working group. I'm having a little trouble remembering, you remember better, survey, the working group that got set up, and I think it's delivered a report just recently. Food residual stream, and I don't know if it gets into PFAS correctly or not, or just it's part of the whole, how do you handle food residuals?
Has that report been submitted?
I think it just came out.
I haven't read it yet.
Okay, so that'll be another piece of homework for us to follow on as we chase this down. So I don't know how long we have you here this morning, Mr. Brady.
Till 10:15.
Okay, so we're a little behind. If we could move to S80, please. And that relates to miscellaneous environment and conservation subjects. I'm the bill sponsor, and this is, that was, I introduced it on behalf of resources, it's a housekeeping bill, although I think there are, I don't want to just call it housekeeping because there's substantive issues that it addresses, so. Wants to get introduced, and so, Mr. Brady, if you could do an introduction, we're going to have Commissioner Bealy is coming in next, so I'm going to ask him to sort of walk us through the rationale for the suggested changes, but if you could give us the let's bolster what's in there so we can understand his explanation better.
Okay, I'm just trying to get it bill up on the screen. So this is the housekeeping bill for the Department of Environmental Conservation. It does have multiple subjects in it related to. That's the wrong one, right?
No, that's it.
Okay.
SAD.
Okay. So it addresses report backs under clean water funding, salvage yard licensing, salvage yard operation. It addresses some provisions around how the money is moved under the state revolving loan funds and what activities are eligible for loans or grants from the state revolving loan funds. It addresses some notice requirements for some of the state permits, and then it that's basically about it. The agency has also this morning requested additional changes. Some of the additional changes they requested were actually made last year in last year's miscellaneous bill. But the changes that they requested this morning are largely technical and not substantive. So I'll just start walking through the bill.
And when you say additional changes, do you mean that are in this draft or that they have, since this has been introduced, there's more?
They have more changes.
Okay.
They just, since this was already introduced, I couldn't make the changes
Yeah,
that they
sure.
requested this morning.
Yeah.
First section relates to the dam registration report. The agency is required to register all dams that are listed on the Vermont Dam Inventory. They were supposed to submit a report to you by January of this year with the registration. They're asking for 2 additional years in order to put together the registration report.
This includes all mill ponds around the state.
It may include mill ponds, yes. If it met,
100 of those.
if it met the definition of a dam, and that's any artificial barrier, including its appurtenant where it says capable of impounding waters. The registration requirement, from my recollection, was you had to register if you could impound 50,000 gallons or more. I don't believe it was by acres. I think the issue with the acreage issue is that if you have an industrial dam, it could be small acreage, but it would be fairly deep.
We just passed that a few years ago.
Yes.
You should know that. I reported,
Sounds familiar.
sounds familiar.
Should I move on?
Yes, please.
So that's section 1. Section 2 relates to the adoption by A&R of the dam design standards. They were supposed to be adopted by July 1, 2022. They're asking for 2 additional years. They have already adopted the rules under subdivision 1 there related to hazard potential classification, dam registration, and dam inspection. But they were supposed to do dam design standards, and they had a group of engineers, dam safety task force, that was helping them do that. So they need additional time. Section 3 relates to what are called encroachment permits. That's when you're going to build a dock or a wire or anything that crosses from the land into surface waters. And that uses a definition of public waters that cross-references an obsolete definition of private ponds and private preserves. What the agency is asking for is to cross-reference the definition of private ponds under the lake shoreline protection standards, and 10 VSA 1442.
So I'm looking, if your version is different than mine, like the top of page 3 on mine has section 2, and it says amendment 3:, and then the next thing is section 3 as a heading.
So yes, that is amending session law from 2018. You'll see section 2 says 2018 acts and resolves number 161. Section 3 is amended to read.
Thank you.
So section 3 in this bill, in the 2018 bill, is for encroachments and cross-referencing a more accurate definition of private pond under the lake shoreline protection standards. Section 4 relates to salvage yards. In order to operate a salvage yard, you need a certificate of location from the municipality and where it's located, and a certificate of registration from A&R. This allows the salvage yard to operate a mobile salvage vehicle crusher if they don't have a certificate of registration from A&R, provided that they're only using that salvage vehicle crusher for closing the salvage yard. A&R has requested some changes here, such as registering with the secretary prior to operating a mobile salvage vehicle crusher. They can talk to you about their requested changes.
Thank you.
Section 5 relates to the use of the revolving loan funds. The state gets money from US EPA under the Federal Clean Water Act and the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. In addition, the state has some of its own revolving loan funds. These funds are capital funds that are generally used for construction of wastewater treatment facility, drinking water supplies. Over the past few years, EPA has been loosening the criteria for use of these funds to allow for them to be used for private businesses, but mostly in the past they were for municipal uses, but they're now being allowed for private businesses and for wastewater treatment systems and drinking water systems that are not public. So your septic tank or your well. So they're loosening these funds up, and there needs to be changes made in our state statutes to allow for those additional US EPA uses. And so one of the first things that's done is on page, it's really going from page 4 to page 5. There's a state wastewater and potable water revolving loan fund, and under US EPA's Clean Water Fund, which is A1, that money can now be used for things such as private wastewater systems or potable water supplies. So that is being incorporated here. Money from that A1 fund, the EPA Clean Water Fund, is now going to be deposited and potentially deposited in the state wastewater and potable water supply fund. And then moving on from there, the funds are administered by the bond bank, except that the currently EPA Drinking Water State Revolving Fund is administered by VITA, and this is providing that the Vermont Drinking Water Planning Loan Fund is also going to be administered by VITA, kind of consolidating the drinking water funds with VITA. And then you will see on page 6, line 7, the ability to use that EPA pollution control revolving fund for community development is to be administered by a community development financial institution. And that is a very specific thing under federal law. I can read you what that is, or I can just move on.
Keep cruising.
Okay. Section 6 amends subchapter 2 of the revolving loan fund statutes. The first thing that gets done here is really just a change to a cross-reference and incorporating the EPA pollution control fund as an ability to pay for loans for private uses, page 8, line 3 and 4. And then you'll see the specific loans to individuals for failed wastewater systems and failed potable water supplies. And you'll see that so that will first change, specific changes, page 9, line 1 through 3. There's currently a requirement that you can only get this loan if you've been denied financing by at least one other financing entity, and that's being removed. On page 10, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, when wastewater systems serving only single-family and multi-family residences meet the definition of a failed system or is demonstrated to have high probability of failing, the A&R may lend money to an owner or one or more of the residences under the Vermont Wastewater and Potable Water Revolving Fund from that EPA pollution control revolving fund. So that's where the flexibility that EPA is building into the use of these funds is being incorporated under the state program. There's going to be some requirements here. No state funds can be used for these loans.
Clearly.
Thank you. How much is in the Vermont Environmental Protection Pollution Control Revolving Loan Fund currently?
I don't know. The amount that goes into the fund each year is determined by a formula set by EPA by rule each year. We're generally pretty low on the list. but it's still millions of dollars. Hannah Smith from the agency is here now. I don't know if Hannah knows how much is in the fund.
I don't have those numbers, but I can come back to you with them.
And the money it's a revolving loan fund, so money goes out and comes back in on loan terms. So the amount really varies based on what EPA is appropriating, what your capital committees are appropriating, and when loans come due to the fund.
Use the funds that also would sometimes have like a negative interest rate on.
Yes, that's a possibility, a very low to negative interest rate or zero interest rate. There are some criteria for these loans being added. You have to be less than 200% of the state average median household income. You have to reside in the residence. You can only, you have to demonstrate sufficient means to pay the principal. It has to be a designated clean water project designated by the secretary as a priority. And when you're serving multiple residences, the applicant only gets their share of the loan. They don't get a loan for all of the residences. Page 11, line 7. No loan can be made to an individual until all the following take place. A&R determines if the wastewater system potable water supply permit is necessary for the design and construction of the project. The individual applies for the loan. Applying for the loan applies for all federal and state permits and licenses. The loans are awarded at or below market interest rates, and all funds are deposited into the EPA pollution control revolving fund. That's pretty much it for the revolving loan fund. I will say, although the bill is here in your committee, your institution's committees, especially the one in the House, takes particular interest about any changes to these statutes.
Notice that. Okay, is there a House companion version of this bill?
There is not.
So I talked to both Chair Ingalls and Chair Evans. I'll give a heads up.
Moving on, you're now moving into sections related to clean water reporting. The first section 7 relates to basically the report on the Lake Champlain TMDL. The first part of the report is whether the phosphorus load from new development is being achieved, and what the agency would like to do is to have the report on the state fiscal year as instead of the calendar year. Many of their clean water reports are based on the fiscal year because of the funding aspect of them. And so they're just looking for consistency in that report. Moving on from there, you can go to section 8. This is moving back a report on the Clean Water Initiative and administration of grants under it from 2023 to 2024. That was the program that you set up a few years ago, the community water quality establishments that were going to push loans and grants at the local level in order to comply with the Clean Water Initiative.
So the agency is asked to not report back to us until 2024. Is that-
Right.
Okay.
Can you remind me, sorry, Clean Water Initiative, I'm not remembering the provisions, what we were aiming at in the Clean Water Initiative.
Well, the Clean Water Initiative is basically shorthand for more than just the Lake Champlain TMDL. It's the statewide improvement of water quality and meeting all TMDL requirements, whether it's Champlain, Magog, Carmine, Connecticut River, and to improving water quality at a statewide level. And then you are going to try to achieve those goals with the clean water service providers that were largely created in this committee. Section 9, you had a report on market or nutrient credit trading. Nutrient credit trading is basically market-based programs that allow pollutant allocation to be traded among sources, usually point sources, but some programs allow non-point sources. The best example of this is the Chesapeake Bay program. You wanted a report back from ANR about the viability of that in Vermont. They've asked to push that report back by 2 years. Then you come to the ANR enforcement. I think most of you know that ANR's enforcement authority is basically co-located for all programs in one chapter of law in Title 10, so that you don't have to duplicate language over and over again in the multiple chapters. And consequently, the penalty amounts are all located in that chapter. Occasionally, a chapter includes a specific penalty with a specific amount. Over time, you've been trying to clean that up and move all of those penalties to the default chapter. This is an example of that. This is the salvage yard. This is the bottle bill penalty, and you're moving that penalty amount to the default ANR enforcement chapter. I think ANR would like to, instead of referencing that specific subdivision, would like to reference the general authority under chapter 201. So that's a request I think that they put in this morning. Similarly, section 11, this is the civil penalties.
Sorry, so just want to check, that doesn't change the amount of the,
It potentially changes.
it might, okay, all right, well, that's just good to know.
So this is fun, because the default enforcement chapters have to include the default enforcement amounts underneath the federal delegated programs. The federal delegated program with the highest default penalty is the Clean Water Act. I thought I had printed it out, but its maximum is $125,000. Right, for multiple offenses.
An ongoing.
Right, the ongoing multiple.
Yeah, so these, so I don't want to speak off the record, I can talk about.
Yeah, so I'll basically it, and then there's something called the Civil Penalty Authority or the Administrative Penalty Authority, I think it's called under that chapter, which basically is ticketing. And ticketing has a maximum penalty amount of $3,000. So most of these could be addressed through a ticketing offense. If it's not addressed through a ticketing offense, it's going to be addressed at a penalty amount much less than a maximum penalty amounts of the default chapter. With that said, section 11, this is the single-use plastics bill, and you included in that bill specific civil penalties for these violations because it was about giving out straws or plastic bags, and you wanted to have relatively lower civil penalty thresholds, and you did that. But the agency is recommending that it default to the default ANR enforcement chapter. I think if you do allow it to default to the enforcement chapter, you probably want to specify that it's going to be a ticketing offense.
But I think, I recall, we were lenient because we wanted, it was a big change. So,
Correct.
thank you.
Page 15, section 12, this is the salvage yard penalty. Is it, again, it's moving from a specific amount to the default chapter. And I think, I don't recall, but I think the agency requested a change to this language this morning. But they can talk about that. And then you get to section 13, line 10, you're moving out of the penalties and into solid waste certification. This is one I'm not really sure why the agency is proposing this. It's moving away from a transportation permit under 6607A, which I thought were still being issued. I don't know why that's being struck, but that's something to ask the agency about. I don't know why that change is being requested. Section 14 is DEC procedural requirements. As with enforcement, as with appeals, DEC has default public notice requirements for different types of permits or different types of actions that they take. And so a type 5 permit procedure is for emergency permits. And they are clarifying that they can use this type 5 emergency public notice for issuance of emergency construction general permits related to stormwater runoff. That emergency permit, to give you context, came out of Irene when people were doing a lot of stuff without a permit. So there was an emergency general permit that was issued. This would allow public notice for that emergency construction general permit when it's an emergency. Section 15, this relates to the encroachment permit. Again, this previously it had said that an encroachment permit was effective or valid 10 days after it was issued. You removed the 10-day requirement, it was either last year or the year before, but you didn't specify that would be effective on the date that it is signed and issued. So the agency is saying that they would like the encroachment permits to be effective on the date that they're signed and issued to the applicant. Section 16 relates to the definition of the failed supply. Currently, when the secretary affirmatively determines that a drinking water supply is not potable, they have to post that information to the agency's website. The agency is asking not to have to do that. And then on page 18, line 18, section 17. Frankly, I think this entire section's being replaced. There's the Petroleum Cleanup Fund Advisory Committee that recommends changes to the Petroleum Cleanup Fund every year. They have introduced a bill in the House that is broader in scope than this and would actually not be consistent with this proposed change in section 17. I believe the agency is going to request that this section be replaced with H229, the Petroleum Cleanup Fund bill.
So just as a matter of process, do we take this section out from consideration in this code?
You could do that. It's really up to you how you deal with this section. You could take this section out entirely and just let it go in H229 and let H229 navigate. If you're not confident that the House is going to pass it, you can put it in here. You can do both. If you pass the same exact language in two different bills, that it doesn't like.
What if they're not the same?
Well, if they're not the same, then it's the last enacted that
Wow.
supersedes.
cool. I mean, that's not cool, but it's interesting. Let's avoid that.
There are certain committees that play that game better than others and kind of try to do that kind of thing for whatever gamesmanship purpose.
Huh.
One of the chairs that play experts out there.
So I won't talk about the cleanup fund right now because I think you're gonna see all new language on it. And that's, yeah.
Thanks very much. Any questions for Ray? So we've been turning along right from 8:30, a long time without a real pause. In there, we got north by the drill. I suppose we can take a 15-minute break and restart at 20 minutes. Thanks.